I was standing in this produce section of the Piggly Wiggly on Henderson Street, minding my own business and squeezing avocados, when Vernon's new wife saw me and started screaming like she'd seen a ghost. Which I suppose she had. Her shopping cart crashed into a pyramid of canned peaches, sending them rolling across the floor in every direction. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes went wide as saucers, and she stumbled backward into a display of paper towels. The whole store went quiet. Everyone turned to stare, at her, then at me, then back at her again. You're dead," she whispered, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "You're supposed to be dead." I looked at her calmly, adjusted my new glasses, the ones I'd bought 3 states away, and set down my avocado. "Well," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was hammering in my chest. "I got better." That's when she really lost it. Started crying and hyperventilating, grabbed her phone with shaking hands, and ran out of the store without her groceries or her purse. Left everything right there in the aisle. The store manager, a sweet young man named Deshaun who goes to my new church, came rushing over to ask if I was all right. I told him I was fine, paid for my groceries, and walked out into the September sunshine like nothing had happened. But my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip my car keys. See, 6 months ago, my husband Vernon and my own sister Yvonne tried to kill me, and for a while there they thought they'd succeeded. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Now let me back up and tell you how a 68-year-old woman who spent her whole life being a good wife, a good daughter, and a good sister ended up faking her own death and starting over in a town where nobody knew her name. It started with a letter. Not a love letter or a birthday card. Those had stopped coming from Vernon about 20 years into our marriage. No, this was a letter from a law firm in Charleston, South Carolina, Fletcher and Associates. Heavy cream-colored paper, embossed letterhead, the kind of serious correspondence that makes your stomach drop even before you open it. I remember I was in the kitchen of our little house in Memphis, the one Vernon and I had lived in for 43 years. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I'd just gotten home from my shift at the hospital where I worked in the cafeteria. Had worked there for 32 years, ever since the kids were old enough for school. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and I was looking forward to a cup of coffee and maybe watching my stories before Vernon got home from wherever he'd been that day. Vernon didn't work anymore, hadn't worked a steady job in about 15 years. Oh, he always had schemes, business ideas, investment opportunities, things that were going to make us rich, but they never panned out. The dry cleaning business that went under in 6 months, the car dealership that cost us our savings, the restaurant that lasted exactly 3 weeks. Every time I'd supported him, worked extra shifts, took out loans in my name, cashed in my small retirement accounts. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You believe in them even when nobody else does. You stand by your man. At least that's what I'd been taught. That's what my mother Odessa had drilled into me since I was a girl. A good wife supports her husband, she'd say. A good wife doesn't complain. So I didn't complain. Not when Vernon's brother made jokes about me being the real man of the family. Not when my sister Yvonne would sigh and say things like, "I don't know how you put up with him, Viv." Not when my own daughter Tanya would roll her eyes every time her father started talking about his next big thing. I just kept working, kept supporting, kept believing that someday things would turn around. Then I opened that letter. "Dear Mrs. Vivian Gaines," it read. "We are writing to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary of the estate of Mr. Theodore Bartholomew, deceased." Theodore Bartholomew. The name rang a bell somewhere in the back of my mind, but I couldn't place it. I kept reading. "Mr. Bartholomew was your late father's first cousin. As he had no children and no surviving siblings, and as you were his closest living relative, his entire estate passes to you. The estate is valued at approximately $11.3 million. I had to read that line 3 times before the words made sense. $11 million. $11 million. I sat down hard in one of our kitchen chairs, the vinyl one with the crack in the seat that I'd been meaning to duct tape for 6 months. My hands were shaking. My vision went blurry with tears. $11 million. I didn't even remember Theodore Bartholomew, but apparently he remembered me. The letter explained that he'd made his fortune in real estate development, never married, and lived a quiet life in Charleston. He'd passed away at 91, and his will specifically named me, not my sister, not my mother, just me, as his heir. We will need to meet with you to discuss the details and begin the transfer process. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. I called the number right away, my heart pounding. A polite woman answered and connected me to Mr. Fletcher himself. He was kind, professional, and confirmed everything the letter said. It was real. All of it was real. When I hung up the phone, I just sat there in my quiet kitchen and cried. For the first time in my entire adult life, I wouldn't have to worry about money. I could retire. I could fix up our house or buy a new one. I could visit my grandbabies in Atlanta whenever I wanted instead of waiting until I'd saved up enough for a bus ticket. I could help Tanya with her mortgage, help my son Devin with his student loans. I could breathe. Vernon came home around 6 that evening. I'd been sitting at that kitchen table for hours, the letter spread out in front of me, making plans in my head. "Vernon," I said, and my voice was shaking with excitement. "Vernon, you won't believe what happened." I showed him the letter. Watched his face as he read it. Watched his eyes get big. Watched his mouth fall open. "11 million?" he said. "Vivian, baby, this is incredible." He swept me up in a hug, spun me around right there in the kitchen like he used to do when we were young, and he still looked at me like I hung the moon. For a moment, everything felt like it used to feel. Like we were a team. Like we were in love. "We're rich, Viv," he kept saying. "We're actually rich." I should have paid attention to that word. We. Within a week, Vernon had called his brother, his cousin, and 3 of his old business partners. He had plans. Big plans. "This is our chance, baby," he'd say, pulling out notebooks full of sketches and numbers. "We can finally do it right. The restaurant, but bigger, better. We'll call it Vernon's Place. No, Vivian's Place. After you, baby. You deserve it." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so bad. But then I started noticing things. The way he'd go quiet when I talked about retiring. The way he'd change the subject when I mentioned fixing up our house. The way he started staying out later and later, always with some excuse about meeting with investors or scoping out locations. Then 2 weeks after I got the letter, my sister Yvonne showed up at my door. Yvonne and I hadn't been close in years. She'd always been the pretty one, the smart one, the one who married well and lived in a big house in Germantown. She'd always looked down on me a little, I think, felt sorry for me for being stuck with Vernon while her husband Claude was a successful accountant. But that day, she showed up with a peach cobbler, my favorite, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I heard about your good fortune," she said, settling herself at my kitchen table like we were the kind of sisters who dropped by for coffee all the time. "Viv, I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. You really do." She asked about my plans. I told her, retirement, maybe some travel, helping the kids. She nodded along, but there was something hungry in her eyes, something that made my skin prickle. "You need to be careful," she said, leaning in close. "People are going to come out of the woodwork now. People wanting money. You need to protect yourself." "I will," I said. "I mean it, Viv. Even people you trust. Even Vernon." She said his name like it tasted bad. "You know how he is with money. How he's always been." "Vernon is my husband." "I know, honey. I know." She patted my hand. "I'm just saying, maybe you should think about protecting your assets, setting up trusts or something. I could help you. Claude knows a lot about financial planning." That should have been my first clue. But I was too overwhelmed, too excited, too relieved to see clearly. The next day, Vernon sat me down with papers. "Baby," he said, "I've been thinking. We should set things up proper, legal, so we're protected." The papers were about making our assets jointly owned, about giving Vernon power of attorney, about setting up Vernon as the executor of my will. "Just in case anything happens," he said, "we should be smart about this." I didn't sign them. Something in my gut told me not to. Vernon didn't push it that day, just kissed my forehead and said we'd talk about it later. But then Mama got involved. Odessa Thornton was 86 years old and sharp as a tack. She'd been running my life since I was born, and she wasn't about to stop now. She called me on a Sunday evening, right after church. "Vivian Louise," she said, always my full name when she was serious. "I need you to come by the house. We need to talk about this inheritance situation." When I got to her house in Orange Mound, Vernon and Yvonne were already there. So was Yvonne's husband, Claude. All of them sitting in Mama's living room like this was some kind of intervention. "Sit down, Vivian," Mama said. I sat. "Now," she said, "we've all been talking, and we're concerned about you handling all this money. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of decisions to make." "I can handle it, Mama." "Can you, though?" That was Yvonne. "Viv, no offense, but you've never dealt with anything like this. You could make mistakes, bad investments. People could take advantage of you." "We think," Vernon said, reaching for my hand, "it might be better if we set up a family trust. All of us together. That way you're not carrying this burden alone." "Burden?" I pulled my hand away. "It's not a burden. It's a blessing." "Don't be selfish, Vivian," Mama said, and her voice was cold. "Family shares. Family helps each other. Or did I raise you to forget where you came from?" I looked around that room at my husband, my sister, my mama. Looked at their faces and saw something I'd never let myself see before. They didn't care about me. They cared about my money. I stood up. "I need to think about this," I said. "Vivian," Vernon started. "I said I need to think." I walked out. Drove home, sat in my car in the driveway for an hour, shaking. That's when I called the lawyer, Mr. Fletcher in Charleston. Told him I wanted to come down and meet in person, wanted to make sure everything was set up right, in my name only. He said he'd be happy to meet with me. We set an appointment for the following Tuesday. I didn't tell Vernon I was going. I took a personal day from work, got up early, and drove the 6 hours to Charleston by myself. Mr. Fletcher was a distinguished-looking black man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His office was beautiful, all wood paneling and leather chairs and windows that looked out over the harbor. He walked me through everything. The properties Theodore had owned, the investments, the cash accounts, all of it, now mine. "Mrs. Gaines," he said, "I need to ask you something. Has anyone been pressuring you to share this inheritance or sign papers?" I must have looked surprised because he smiled gently. "It happens more often than you'd think," he said. "People come into money, and suddenly everyone has their hand out, even family, especially family." I told him everything. About Vernon's papers, about Mama and Yvonne's intervention, about feeling like I was drowning in my own family. He listened, took notes, and then said something that changed everything. "Mrs. Gaines, let me be very clear. This money is yours, and yours alone. You don't owe it to anyone. Not your husband, not your sister, not your mother. No one. And if anyone is trying to coerce you or manipulate you into signing it over, that's not just wrong. It could be illegal." He helped me set up everything properly. Trusts for my grandchildren's education, a will that left money to my kids but nothing to Vernon, accounts in my name only, protection. I drove home that evening feeling lighter than I had in weeks, feeling like maybe, finally, I could take control of my own life. I should have known they wouldn't let me go that easy. 2 days later, I was walking out of the hospital after my shift. It was dark. I'd stayed late to cover for a coworker. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered here and there under the streetlights. I was halfway to my car when I heard the engine. Loud, getting louder, getting closer. I turned around and saw the headlights, a big dark SUV coming straight at me. Fast, too fast. I tried to run, but I'm 68 years old with bad knees and feet that ache from standing all day. I didn't have a chance. The last thing I remember was the sound of the impact, the feeling of flying, and then the pavement coming up to meet me. Then, everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's right, Little Rock. 130 miles from Memphis, in a hospital where nobody knew my name. The first face I saw was a woman I'd never met before. She was maybe 40, with beautiful dark skin and her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a gray suit that looked expensive, and when she saw my eyes open, she leaned forward with an expression of pure relief. "Mrs. Gaines," she said softly, "don't try to move too fast. You've been through quite an ordeal." My mouth was dry. My whole body hurt. I tried to speak, but only a croak came out. She held a cup of water to my lips, helped me sip through a straw. "My name is Janine Calloway," she said. "I'm an attorney with Fletcher & Associates. Mr. Fletcher sent me to find you." "How?" I managed to whisper. "How did you end up in Little Rock?" She settled back in her chair. "That's an interesting story. When you didn't show up for your follow-up appointment, and when Mr. Fletcher couldn't reach you by phone, he got worried. He had me make some calls. I found out you'd been hit by a car in the hospital parking lot. The paramedics said you were in bad shape. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, fractured skull, internal bleeding." I closed my eyes, remembering the headlights, the impact, the darkness. "The hospital in Memphis stabilized you," Janine continued, "but you needed surgery, specialized care. And here's where it gets interesting. Your husband, Vernon, signed papers to have you transferred here, to this private facility. Told them he wanted the best care for his beloved wife." Something in her tone made me open my eyes again. She was watching me carefully. "He also," she said, "told them you had no other family, no one to notify, no one to visit. He said he'd be handling all your medical decisions, and then he left. Hasn't been back since." The water I'd just swallowed threatened to come back up. "Mr. Fletcher asked me to check on you personally. I've been here every day for the past 72 hours. And Mrs. Gaines, I need to tell you something important." She leaned forward again, her voice dropping. "The car that hit you? It was registered to your sister Yvonne." The room tilted. I gripped the bed rails. Security footage from the hospital parking lot shows a dark blue Cadillac Escalade, Yvonne's Escalade, accelerating toward you at high speed. The driver was male, average height, wearing a baseball cap. The plates were partially obscured with mud, but enhancement software confirmed the registration. "Vernon," I whispered. She nodded. "That would be my guess. Your sister's car, but I believe your husband was driving. And Mrs. Gaines, there's more. Do you feel strong enough to hear it?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did. Janine pulled out a tablet and showed me documents, legal papers. 3 days after the accident, while you were in a coma, Vernon filed a petition with the court to be appointed as your legal guardian. He submitted paperwork claiming you've been showing signs of dementia and mental incompetence. He had supporting statements from your mother and your sister. My own mother. "He's trying to get control of your inheritance," Janine said. "If he succeeds in having you declared incompetent, he can override any legal arrangements you've made. Access all your accounts, everything." "They tried to kill me," I said, and saying it out loud made it real, made the whole horrible truth real. "My own husband. My own sister." "Yes," Janine said gently. I believe they did. And when you survived, they moved to Plan B. Have you declared mentally unfit? There's a hearing scheduled for next week. I started crying then. Not pretty crying. Ugly, gasping sobs that hurt my broken ribs and made the monitors beep. Janine held my hand and waited until I could breathe again. What do I do? I asked. Well, Janine said, and for the first time, she smiled. That depends. How angry are you? Before we continue, please drop a comment if you've ever experienced something like this. We'd love to hear your story, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. Over the next 2 weeks, while I recovered in that Little Rock hospital under a false name, Janine had registered me as Ruth Washington, I learned the full extent of my family's betrayal. Janine brought me copies of documents, recordings, evidence that Mr. Fletcher's firm had quietly gathered. They'd been suspicious from the start, she told me. Too many family members suddenly interested in an elderly woman's finances. Too much pressure. Too fast. Vernon had met with 3 different lawyers about contesting the inheritance. He'd argued that as my husband of 45 years, he should have rights to the money regardless of what the will said. When that didn't work, he'd started talking about my supposed mental decline. Yvonne had been worse. She'd actually contacted Theodore Bartholomew's lawyers before his death, trying to establish a relationship, trying to position herself as the closest family member. She'd been furious when the will named me instead. And Mama had written a letter to the probate court claiming I'd been simple and easily confused my whole life. Said I couldn't be trusted to manage my own affairs. Her own daughter. Why? I asked Janine one afternoon. I was sitting up by then, able to eat real food, able to walk slowly around the room. Why would they do this? I would have helped them, would have shared. Why try to kill me? Because sharing means you retain control, Janine said. They don't want some of the money. They want all of it. And they want you gone. She showed me more documents. Vernon had taken out a life insurance policy on me 6 months earlier. A big one. $2 million, with him as the sole beneficiary. I'd never known about it, never signed anything, but somehow my signature was on the application. Forgery, Janine said. We can prove it, but it shows premeditation. This wasn't a sudden decision. They've been planning this. I thought about all those nights Vernon had been out meeting with investors. All those times Yvonne had visited with her fake concern and her peach cobbler. All those years I'd worked and sacrificed and supported and believed. All those years I'd been nothing but a meal ticket. The anger that rose up in me then was like nothing I'd ever felt. Not hot anger, cold, sharp, clear. I want to fight, I told Janine. I want to fight them all. She smiled that smile again. I was hoping you'd say that. The plan was simple but risky. I would stay dead, or at least missing. The hospital in Memphis had listed me as transferred, but Vernon had told everyone I'd died during surgery. He'd even held a small funeral service at Mama's church. Janine showed me the obituary he'd placed in the commercial appeal. Vivian Louise Thornton Gaines, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, passed peacefully surrounded by love. Surrounded by love. I laughed when I read that, and it hurt my ribs. While I recovered, Janine and Mr. Fletcher built our case. They gathered evidence of the hit and run, the forged insurance documents, Vernon's attempts to access my accounts. They deposed the doctor who'd supposedly diagnosed me with dementia. Turned out Vernon had paid him $5,000 for a letter he'd written without ever meeting me. They found out Yvonne had already spent money she didn't have. Banking on the inheritance, she'd bought a new Mercedes, booked a European cruise, put a down payment on a vacation condo in Florida. She was in debt up to her eyeballs, counting on my money to save her. And Vernon had moved his girlfriend into our house 3 days after my death. A woman named Charisse, who was 32 years old and worked at the sports bar where Vernon spent most of his afternoons. He'd already proposed to her, already promised her a life of luxury. He told people you two had been separated for years, Janine told me. Said you'd grown apart. That you'd have wanted him to be happy. I looked at my wedding ring, still on my finger despite everything. 45 years I'd worn it. 45 years of for better or worse, in sickness and in health. I took it off and handed it to Janine. Sell it, I said. Donate the money to the women's shelter on Union Avenue. By week 3, I was well enough to leave the hospital. Janine had rented me a small apartment in North Little Rock, in a quiet complex where nobody asked questions. I was still healing, still weak, but I could move around, could think clearly, could plan. The hearing is in 4 days, Janine told me. Vernon's petitioned to be appointed your guardian. He thinks it's going to be a formality. You're missing, presumed dead, so the judge will likely appoint him to handle your estate temporarily. Once he has access, he'll drain everything and disappear. What do we do? We have 2 options. 1, we reveal that you're alive now, before the hearing. File charges, go public, let the police handle it. Or we let the hearing proceed. Let Vernon and your family commit perjury on the record. Let them lie to a judge about your mental state, your whereabouts, their intentions, and then we bring you in as a surprise witness. I thought about Vernon in our house with his new woman, about Yvonne in her new Mercedes, about Mama writing letters calling me simple and confused. Option 2, I said. I want to see their faces. The next 3 days crawled by. Janine prepped me for testimony, helped me understand what would happen in court. She also helped me with something else, finding a new place to live. You can't go back to Memphis, she said. Even after all this is over, too many memories, too much pain. She was right. I didn't want to go back. Didn't want to see my old house, my old job, my old life. That Vivian, the one who worked herself to the bone for an ungrateful husband, who accepted scraps of affection from her family. She was gone. Dead as Vernon claimed. I wanted to be someone new. We looked at houses in Little Rock, in Hot Springs, in Fayetteville. Small places, quiet places, towns where I could start fresh. I found it in Eureka Springs, a little tourist town up in the mountains. A beautiful Victorian house with a wraparound porch and a garden that needed tending. A place where I could breathe, where I could heal. I'll take it, I told Janine. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Not in my old clothes. Janine had taken me shopping, helped me pick out things that made me feel strong. A navy blue dress with a matching jacket. Good shoes. I'd gotten my hair done at a salon in Little Rock. Cut shorter and styled nice. New glasses that made me look scholarly instead of tired. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. You ready? Janine asked. Yes, I said. And I was. The courtroom in Memphis was small, just a family law hearing room. When Janine and I walked in through the back door, Vernon was already there with his lawyer. So was Yvonne with Claude. So was Mama. They were all dressed in black, like they were in mourning, putting on a show for the judge. Vernon was talking to his lawyer, looking confident, relaxed, like this was just a formality before he got rich. We sat in the back row, quiet. They didn't even turn around, didn't notice us. The judge came in, a black woman in her 50s named Judge Harriet Washington. She looked stern and no-nonsense as she reviewed the papers in front of her. This is a petition for guardianship, she said. Mr. Vernon Gaines is requesting to be appointed guardian over the person and estate of his wife, Mrs. Vivian Gaines, who is alleged to be mentally incompetent and currently missing. Mr. Gaines, you're represented by counsel? Vernon's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor, Blake Harrison representing the petitioner. And Mrs. Gaines is not present? No, Your Honor. As stated in our filing, Mrs. Gaines has been missing since she was transferred to a medical facility following a tragic accident. We believe she may have wandered away in a state of confusion due to her deteriorating mental condition. I felt Janine's hand on my arm, keeping me steady. I see, Judge Washington said. And you have witnesses to testify about her mental state? Yes, Your Honor. Her mother, Mrs. Odessa Thornton, and her sister, Mrs. Yvonne Fletcher. Yvonne took the stand first, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help her God. Then she started lying. Vivian has been declining for years, she said, her voice trembling like she was holding back tears. Forgetting things, getting confused. We were so worried about her. Can you give specific examples? The judge asked. Oh, yes. She'd forget appointments, forget conversations we'd had. Sometimes she wouldn't recognize her own grandchildren. It was heartbreaking. Every word a lie. Every word designed to paint me as incompetent, as someone who couldn't manage her own life. Mama went next. Talked about how I'd always been slow, how I'd needed extra help in school, how I couldn't be trusted with important decisions. I watched my own mother lie to a judge, and something inside me finally, completely broke free. Not broke down, broke free. When they were done, Vernon's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, given the testimony and the documentation we've provided, we ask that you grant this petition. Mr. Gaines is prepared to assume full responsibility for his wife's care and estate. He only wants what's best for her. Judge Washington looked at the papers again, frowned. Mr. Harrison, there's something that concerns me about this petition. The medical evidence you've submitted, this letter from Dr. Felix Drummond, it's not properly notarized, and I don't see any actual medical records or test results supporting a diagnosis of dementia or incompetence. Vernon's lawyer shifted nervously. Your Honor, Mrs. Gaines was resistant to formal testing. Dr. Drummond based his assessment on family reports, and family reports are not medical evidence, Counselor. That's when Janine stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and strong. If I may approach. Vernon spun around, saw me. His face went white as a sheet. Yvonne gasped. Mama made a sound like she'd been punched. Who are you? Judge Washington asked. Janine Calloway, Your Honor, representing Mrs. Vivian Gaines. She walked forward and handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. My client is present and wishes to testify regarding this petition. Vernon found his voice. That's impossible. She's dead. She died in the hospital, I was told. You were told wrong, Mr. Gaines, Janine said coldly. Mrs. Gaines is very much alive, and she has quite a story to tell. Judge Washington looked at me, and I stood up. Walked down that aisle on legs that shook but held. Walked past my husband, my sister, my mother. Their faces were a mixture of shock and fear and rage. I took the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. And then I told it. All of it. I told the judge about the inheritance, about the pressure from my family to sign it over, about Vernon's forged insurance policy, about the hit and run, Yvonne's car, Vernon driving, about waking up in Little Rock and discovering their plan to have me declared incompetent. Vernon's lawyer tried to object, to interrupt, but Judge Washington silenced him with a look. When I finished, the courtroom was dead quiet. Then Judge Washington turned to Vernon, and her expression was like iron. Mr. Gaines, she said, I am denying your petition. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the matters Mrs. Gaines has described. Bailiff, please notify the district attorney's office that we may have criminal charges to file. Vernon stood up. This is insane! She's lying! She's the one who's confused! Your Honor, you can't possibly— Sit down, Mr. Gaines, or I'll hold you in contempt. But Vernon didn't sit down. He started backing toward the door, his eyes wild. This is all a misunderstanding. I love my wife. I would never— That's when the police walked in. Janine had called them before the hearing, given them copies of all our evidence. They'd been waiting outside. Vernon Gaines, the lead officer said, you're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Vernon ran. He actually ran. Bolted for the side door like he had a chance. The officers caught him before he made it 5 steps, tackled him right there in the courtroom. Yvonne started screaming. Mama collapsed in her chair. And I sat in that witness stand, watching it all unfold, and felt nothing but cold, clear satisfaction. They arrested Yvonne, too, right there in the courtroom. She cried and begged and claimed she didn't know anything about Vernon's plans, but the evidence said otherwise. Text messages between them, bank records showing she'd paid for the mud to obscure her license plates, receipts from a burner phone. Mama they let go. She hadn't been directly involved in the hit and run, though her lies on the stand would cost her. Judge Washington made it clear there would be consequences for the perjury. As they led Vernon out in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. "Vivian," he said, "baby, please, tell them this is all a mistake. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at the man I'd spent 45 years with, the man I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the man I'd believed in when nobody else would, the man who'd tried to kill me for money. "I don't know you," I said, and I meant it. After the hearing, Janine took me to lunch at a soul food place near the courthouse. I couldn't eat much, my stomach was still in knots, but I managed some greens and cornbread. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now they face trial," Janine said. "Vernon and Yvonne both. The DA is confident they can get convictions. The evidence is solid. You'll have to testify, but after that, you're free. Free to go live your life however you want." Free? I'd never really been free before. Always someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. Always defined by what I could do for other people. "My kids," I said suddenly. "Tanya and Devin. Do they know?" Janine nodded gently. "We contacted them yesterday. Told them you were alive. Told them what happened. They're both catching flights in tomorrow. They want to see you. Were they... I couldn't finish the question. "Were they involved? No. They had no idea. In fact, Tanya told me she'd been calling Vernon after your death asking about funeral arrangements, and he kept putting her off. She was getting suspicious." Relief flooded through me. My babies hadn't betrayed me. They were still mine. We finished lunch and walked back to Janine's car. It was a beautiful May afternoon, warm and sunny. Memphis in spring, when the city comes alive. I looked around at the streets I'd known my whole life, the city where I'd been born, raised, married, the city where I'd almost died. "I'm ready to go," I told Janine. "To Eureka Springs, to my new house, my new life." "You sure you don't want to stay for a few days? See your kids?" "They can come visit me there," I said. "I'm done with Memphis." We drove north that afternoon, 3 hours through Arkansas, watching the flat Delta country give way to mountains and forests, watching my old life disappear in the rearview mirror. When we pulled up to my new house, my house, that I'd bought with my money, that nobody could take from me, I sat in the car for a minute just looking at it. The wraparound porch, the garden, the wind chimes singing in the breeze. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gaines," Janine said softly. I walked up those porch steps, put my key in the lock, and opened the door to my future. For 4 months, I lived in peace. Saw my kids and grandkids. They came to visit almost every weekend, marveling at the house, at the change in me. Tanya kept saying I looked younger, lighter, like I'd shed 20 years along with my old life. I joined a new church, made new friends, started volunteering at the community center, took painting classes, did all the things I'd never had time for when I was working myself to death for Vernon's dreams. And then, one Saturday morning in September, I made the mistake of driving back to Memphis. Just for the day. I needed to sign some papers at Janine's office, close out the last few details of my old life. I'd planned to get in and get out. Quick visit, no nostalgia. But I needed groceries for the drive back, and the Piggly Wiggly on Henderson Street was right there. And I thought, what are the chances? That's when Charisse, Vernon's girlfriend, his new wife, they'd apparently gotten married in a jailhouse ceremony while he was out on bail, saw me in the produce section, saw a woman who was supposed to be dead, and started screaming. By the time I got to my car, Charisse had called Vernon. By the time I got to Janine's office, Vernon had violated his bail conditions by trying to contact me through Devon's phone. By the time I finished signing my papers, Vernon was back in jail and Charisse was on Facebook posting a video claiming I was a zombie demon woman who'd come back to ruin her life. The video went viral in Memphis. Within hours, it had 10,000 shares. Within a day, the local news had picked it up. Woman presumed dead appears alive. Husband facing attempted murder charges. They camped out in front of Janine's office, trying to get me to comment. I didn't talk to any of them. Just put on my sunglasses, got in my car, and drove back to Eureka Springs while my phone blew up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old coworkers from the hospital wanting to know if the stories were true. Church members I'd known for decades, suddenly remembering they'd always thought Vernon was no good. Cousins I barely knew offering support, and, inevitably, asking if I needed help managing my inheritance. I turned off my phone and spent the evening on my porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, drinking sweet tea and trying to calm the shaking in my hands. The trial was set for October. Both Vernon and Yvonne had been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and a half-dozen other counts. Claude had flipped on Yvonne the second the police questioned him, gave them everything in exchange for immunity. Turned out he'd known about the plan but hadn't participated directly. Just looked the other way while his wife tried to kill her own sister. They were divorced within a month. Mama had been charged with perjury but took a plea deal, probation and community service on account of her age. I didn't care what happened to her anymore. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to cook and braid hair and pray, who'd also taught me that I wasn't worth as much as other people. She was a stranger to me now. She'd called once, after the hearing, left a voicemail saying she was sorry, that she'd only been trying to keep the family together, that I needed to forgive and move on because that's what Christian women do. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. The week before the trial, Tanya and Devon came to stay with me. Brought the grandbabies, Tanya's 2 girls, Zaria and Imani, and Devon's son, little Kamari. My house filled up with noise and laughter and the smell of the pound cake Tanya made using my mama's recipe, the one good thing Odessa had given me that I was willing to keep. We sat on the porch one evening after the kids were asleep, the 3 of us drinking wine and watching fireflies. "Mama," Tanya said quietly, "we're so sorry for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting you." "Baby, you didn't know. Neither of you did." "We should have known," Devon said. His voice was rough with emotion. "Should have known Dad was capable of this. All those years of watching him use you, and we just let it happen." "Your father wasn't always like this," I said, though even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Had Vernon ever really loved me? Or had I just been useful, someone to work and support him while he chased his dreams? Or maybe he was, and I couldn't see it, didn't want to see it. "What he did to you," Tanya said, and her voice broke. "Mama, he tried to kill you, his own wife, and Aunt Yvonne helped him. I keep thinking about all those family dinners, all those Thanksgivings and Christmases, and they were planning to murder you the whole time." I reached over and took her hand. "But they didn't succeed. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm more myself than I've ever been." It was true. Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the fear, I felt more alive now than I had in decades. Like I'd been sleepwalking through my life and had finally woken up. "The kids keep asking about Grandpa," Devon said. "What do we tell them?" I'd thought about this, thought about it a lot. Tell them the truth, in a way they can understand. That sometimes people make very bad choices, that Grandpa made bad choices and now he has to face consequences, and that it's okay to be sad and angry and confused about it. Kamari wanted to know if we could visit him in jail, Devin said. I told him no. Good, I said firmly. Those babies are my priority now. Their education, their future, their peace. I've set up trust funds for all 3 of them. Full ride to any college they want, plus graduate school if they choose it. They're going to have opportunities I never had, that you and Tanya never had. Mama, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's my money and my choice, and I choose to invest in my grandchildren's future. I squeezed Tanya's hand. I'm setting up accounts for you and Devin, too. Not millions. You're both grown and capable. But enough to pay off your debts. Buy decent houses, have some security. The rest I'm keeping for myself and for charity. There's a women's shelter in Memphis that's going to get a very large donation, and the community center here in Eureka Springs. Before we continue, quick question. What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The trial started on a Monday in mid-October. I drove to Memphis the night before. Checked into a hotel under my new legal name. I'd officially changed it to Vivian Louise Bartholomew, taken my benefactor's last name and left Gaines behind, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Just lay there in the dark thinking about the next day. About facing Vernon in court. About telling my story in front of strangers, having every detail of my humiliation and pain picked apart by lawyers. But when morning came and Janine knocked on my door, I was ready. The courtroom was packed. News crews weren't allowed inside, but the public gallery was full of people. Some I knew, most I didn't. I saw former co-workers from the hospital, members from my old church, neighbors from the old house. I saw Charisse, sitting in the front row behind Vernon's table, wearing all black like she was at a funeral. She glared at me with pure hatred when I walked in. Vernon and Yvonne sat at separate tables with their lawyers. They weren't allowed to sit together, conflict of interest. Vernon had lost weight, looked older. Prison orange didn't suit him. Yvonne looked like she'd aged 10 years, her hair gone gray at the roots, her expensive clothes replaced with a simple dress. Neither of them looked at me when I entered. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution laid out their case piece by piece. The security footage of Yvonne's car accelerating toward me, the forged insurance documents, the text messages between Vernon and Yvonne planning the accident, the financial records showing their debts, their desperation. Claude testified, told the jury how Yvonne had been obsessed with my inheritance from the moment she heard about it. How she'd raged about me getting the money when I was just a cafeteria worker and she was educated and cultured. How she'd come home one night and told him the problem was being handled. A forensics expert testified about the impact patterns, the lack of skid marks, the evidence that the driver had deliberately aimed for me. The doctor from Little Rock testified about my injuries, showed photos that made people in the gallery gasp, my broken body on the CT scan, the emergency surgery that saved my life. And then I testified. I told them everything. My whole life, the 45 years of marriage, the sacrifices, the support, the love I'd given freely. The inheritance that was supposed to be my salvation, the pressure from my family, the hit and run. Waking up in Little Rock and discovering my husband had tried to kill me and planned to steal everything I had. Vernon's lawyer tried to shake me on cross-examination, suggested I was confused, mistaken, suffering from the head injury, suggested maybe the accident was just that, an accident. Ma'am, isn't it possible you simply didn't see the vehicle? That you stepped into traffic? In a parking lot? I said calmly. At night? When the car accelerated from a standstill and drove across 3 rows of parking spaces to hit me? No, sir, that's not possible. And isn't it true that you and your husband had discussed divorce? That perhaps you're simply a bitter ex-wife trying to get revenge? We never discussed divorce, I said. I loved my husband. I would have given him anything he asked for, but that wasn't enough. He wanted everything, and he wanted me gone. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but I didn't break, didn't cry, just told the truth in a steady voice. When I stepped down, I caught Vernon's eye. He was crying, shaking his head like he couldn't believe this was happening. Too late for tears now. Yvonne didn't testify. Her lawyer advised against it. Vernon did, though. Took the stand and swore he loved me, had always loved me, would never hurt me. Said the insurance policy was just good planning. Said he hadn't been driving Yvonne's car that night. Said the text messages were taken out of context. Said I was confused and mistaken, and probably still suffering from my head injury. The jury didn't believe him. I could see it in their faces. Closing arguments happened on Thursday afternoon. The prosecutor was a young black woman named Kennedy Shaw, sharp as a razor and fierce as fire. She stood in front of that jury and laid it out plain. "This case is about greed," she said, "pure and simple. Vernon Gaines and Yvonne Fletcher saw an opportunity. An elderly woman, someone they'd dismissed and underestimated her entire life, suddenly had wealth. And rather than be happy for her, rather than support her or even just leave her alone, they decided to take it. To take everything, including her life." She pointed at Vernon and Yvonne. These defendants didn't just want Vivian Gaines's money. They wanted her erased, gone, dead. And when she survived their attempt to kill her, they tried to destroy her credibility, her autonomy, her very identity. They stood in a court of law and called her incompetent, confused, mentally unfit. Her own husband, her own sister, her own mother. Kennedy's voice rose. But Vivian Gaines is none of those things. She is strong. She is clear-minded. She is a survivor. And she is here, alive, to tell you exactly what these defendants did to her. The evidence is overwhelming. The security footage, the financial records, the text messages, it all points to one inescapable conclusion. Vernon Gaines and Yvonne Fletcher conspired to murder Vivian Gaines for her inheritance, and they very nearly succeeded. She paused. Let that sink in. Don't let them succeed now. Hold them accountable. Find them guilty. Give Vivian Gaines the justice she deserves. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I waited in a conference room with Janine, Tanya, and Devin, drinking bad coffee and trying not to fall apart. When the bailiff called us back, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The jury foreman stood, a black man in his 60s, a retired postal worker. He looked at the judge and said, "We have reached a verdict, Your Honor. In the case of the state versus Vernon Gaines, on the charge of attempted murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." Vernon's head dropped. Charisse let out a sob. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." They went through all the counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Then Yvonne's verdict. Same results. Guilty on every count. When it was over, when the judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date, I finally let myself cry. Tanya held me on one side, Devin on the other, and we cried together in that courtroom while Vernon and Yvonne were led away in handcuffs. Justice. Finally, justice. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Vernon got 25 years. Yvonne got 20. With their ages, Vernon was 70, Yvonne 66. They'd likely die in prison. I should have felt triumphant, and part of me did, but mostly I just felt tired, relieved, ready to be done with all of it. After sentencing, I gave one interview, just one, to the local Memphis News, because I wanted to say something on the record. "I spent my whole life making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger," I told the reporter, a young woman with kind eyes. "I worked and sacrificed and gave everything I had to people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. But I survived. And now I'm going to live the rest of my life for myself, on my own terms." And I hope any woman watching this who's in a similar situation, who's being used or diminished or taken for granted, I hope she knows it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to walk away. It's never too late to start over. The interview went viral. Women from all over the country reached out, sharing their stories, thanking me for speaking up, asking for advice. I couldn't respond to all of them, but I read every message. And I started thinking about what else I could do with my money, my platform, my second chance at life. I partnered with a nonprofit that helps women leave abusive relationships, funded a scholarship program for older women going back to school, bought the building that housed the Memphis Women's Shelter and donated it to them, mortgage-free. I traveled, saw Paris and Ghana and the Grand Canyon, took my grandkids to Disney World, took Tanya and Devin on a cruise. I dated a little, nothing serious, but it was nice to go to dinner with a man who paid his own way and asked about my day. A retired teacher named Gerald who made me laugh and didn't want anything from me but my company. I joined the choir at my church in Eureka Springs. Turned out I had a pretty good voice when I wasn't too tired and stressed to use it. I painted, gardened, read books, took naps in the middle of the day just because I could. I lived. 1 year after the trial, I went back to Memphis one last time. Not for court or lawyers or unfinished business. Just to visit Tanya and see the grandkids' school play. Zaria was playing Harriet Tubman. She was magnificent, fierce and brave and strong. After the show, she ran up to me in her costume, her eyes shining. "Grandma, did you see me? Did you like it?" "Baby, you were perfect," I told her, hugging her tight. "An absolute star." Ms. Johnson says Harriet Tubman was a hero because she was brave enough to save herself first, and then she came back and saved other people. That's like you, Grandma. You saved yourself. I looked at my granddaughter, this beautiful, smart, strong girl who would grow up knowing her worth, knowing she didn't have to make herself small for anyone, and felt my heart swell. "Yes, baby," I said. "I did, and so can you, if you ever need to. You remember that." She hugged me again, then ran off to celebrate with her friends. I stood there in that school auditorium, surrounded by families and laughter and hope, and realized something. I wasn't angry anymore, not at Vernon or Yvonne or Mama or any of them. They'd taken enough of my life. I wasn't giving them another moment of my peace. I was free. That evening I drove back to Eureka Springs, pulled up to my house as the sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold. My porch light was on. I'd left it on that morning, a welcome home to myself. I sat in my car for a moment just looking at my home, my sanctuary, my second chance. Then I got out, walked up those porch steps, and opened the door to the rest of my life. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My paintings on the walls, my books on the shelves, my plants thriving in the window. The guest rooms ready for whenever Tanya and Devin and the babies wanted to visit. I made myself a cup of tea, took it out to the porch, and sat in my rocking chair watching the stars come out. Somewhere in Memphis, Vernon and Yvonne were in prison cells, living with the consequences of their greed and cruelty. Somewhere in Memphis, Mama was alone in her house, dealing with the shame of what she'd done. But I wasn't in Memphis anymore. I was here, in my mountain town, in my beautiful home, living a life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. I was 69 years old. I'd survived a murder attempt, a conspiracy, a family's greed. I'd lost a husband, a sister, a mother. But I'd found myself. And that, I realized, sipping my tea and watching fireflies dance in my garden, was worth more than all the money in the world. I pulled out my phone. I'd gotten better with technology in my new life, and opened the voice memo app, started recording. "Note to self," I said softly. "Tomorrow, call that travel agent. Book that trip to New Zealand. Life is short, and I've got a lot of living to catch up on." I smiled, stopped the recording, and took another sip of tea. The night was beautiful. The air was sweet. And I was finally, completely, entirely free. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Please subscribe for more stories and drop a comment. We read every single one.